This is Jacob Friedman.
If you want to see what the end of the post-war liberal order actually looks like, don't look at the battlefields of Eastern Europe or the tensions in the South China Sea. Look at the schedule of the Prime Minister of Canada. Mark Carney is going to China. From January 13th through the 17th, 2026, the Canadian Prime Minister will be in Beijing for high-level state talks, the first time a sitting Canadian leader has made that trek in nearly a decade. On the surface, if you just glance at the headlines scrolling across your screen, this looks like a standard diplomatic reset. You will hear phrases like restoring trade relations and opening new markets. The official story being peddled by the Prime Minister's office is one of pragmatic economic stewardship. They want you to see a seasoned technocrat doing what he does best, crunching the numbers and finding efficiencies. After all, Carney is the man who steered the Bank of Canada through the 2008 financial crisis and navigated the chaos of Brexit as the governor of the Bank of England. He is the ultimate insider, a man whose resume reads like a checklist of global elite institutions: Harvard, Oxford, Goldman Sachs. When he says this is about diversifying Canadian exports and stabilizing the economy, it sounds reasonable, almost boring. But to view this trip merely as a trade mission is to miss the tectonic shift happening beneath our feet. This isn't a courtesy call. It is a desperate maneuver born of necessity, a scramble for survival in a world where Canada's oldest friend has turned into its biggest economic threat. We need to be very clear about why Carney is shaking hands with Xi Jinping. It is not because the Liberal government has suddenly developed a deep ideological affinity for the Chinese Communist Party. It is because Donald Trump has effectively declared economic war on his northern neighbor. When Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, the assumption in Ottawa was that the guardrails of the USMCA, the updated NAFTA, would hold. That assumption was wrong. The speed with which the American market closed off was breathtaking. On February 1st, 2025, citing national security concerns related to fentanyl and immigration, President Trump signed executive orders slapping 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. It was a blunt instrument, damaging enough on its own. But by August, he upped the ante to 35% on non-compliant goods. This wasn't just a policy tweak, it was a shakedown. We saw the immediate impact in Ontario, where assembly plants for the auto sector, an industry that employs over 100,000 people, began cutting shifts and freezing hiring. We saw it in the timber communities that have been fighting softwood lumber disputes for decades, now facing duties that make their business model fundamentally unviable. The estimates suggest these tariffs could shave 1% to 2% off Canada's GDP. That sounds like a small number until you realize it represents billions of dollars in lost wages, stalled investments, and shuttered businesses. So when you see Carney in Beijing, you are watching a leader trying to solve a math problem that has no good answer. He is caught in a vice between two superpowers. On one side, you have an erratic, protectionist United States that treats trade agreements as temporary inconveniences. On the other, you have China, a rising authoritarian power that has already demonstrated its willingness to use trade as a weapon. Remember the two Michaels? Remember the bans on Canadian canola? Those weren't accidents. They were punishments for Canada upholding its extradition treaty with the U.S. during the Meng Wanzhou affair. Canada played by the rules of the international order, and it got burned. Now, with the U.S. burning down the rule book, Carney is betting that he can navigate a relationship with Beijing without getting swallowed whole. It is a profound irony that Carney, a man often derided by his critics as a globalist and a creature of Davos, is the one tasked with this pivot. He is, in many ways, the avatar of the very system that is currently collapsing. Born in the Northwest Territories and raised in Alberta, he climbed the meritocratic ladder to the very heights of global finance. He believes in markets. He believes in the rational flow of capital. But the world he is operating in now is neither rational nor market-driven in the traditional sense. It is driven by raw power and nationalist grievance. when he meets with President Xi, who personally invited him after a breakthrough conversation at the APEC summit in South Korea last October. Carney will be walking a tightrope. He has to secure economic lifelines, specifically for the agriculture and energy sectors, without appearing to capitulate on the very human rights and security concerns that froze relations in the first place. This is the hidden story that most coverage misses. We focus on the what, the tariffs, the meetings, the press conferences, but we ignore the why. Why is a G7 nation, a founding member of NATO, forced to seek economic refuge with America's primary strategic rival? The answer lies in the total erosion of trust. The America First doctrine, in its second, more aggressive iteration, has made it clear that alliances are transactional. If Canada cannot rely on the U.S. market, which absorbs 75% of its exports, then Canada ceases to be a sovereign economic entity unless it finds other buyers. Carney's goal to double non-U.S. exports in a decade isn't just a slogan, it is an existential imperative. If we don't diversify, we become a vassal state, subject to the whims of whoever sits in the Oval Office. But let's look closer at what diversification actually entails in this context. It means engaging with a regime that Washington actively identifies as a threat. It means navigating the treacherous waters of the no-limits partnership between Beijing and Moscow. It means potentially easing the 100% tariffs Canada imposed on Chinese electric vehicles, tariffs that were originally put in place to align with US and EU policy. If Carney trades away those EV tariffs to get Canadian canola back into China, he risks infuriating Washington even further. It is a high-stakes gamble. He is trying to leverage China's market to offset American protectionism, hoping that he doesn't trigger a secondary wave of American punishment in the process. This is the bind of the middle power in the 21st century. You are no longer protected by the umbrella of a benevolent hegemon. You are exposed. And when you are exposed, you have to make deals with people you might otherwise prefer to avoid. We need to understand that this visit is not an isolated event. It is a symptom of a broken system. The liberal international order, which prioritized free trade and democratic alliances, is being replaced by a fragmented world of competing blocs. Canada, which thrived in the old system, is ill-equipped for the new one. Carney's background in central banking, where stability is the goal and technocratic competence is the method, is being tested against a reality that is chaotic and fiercely political. We often talk about these trade wars in abstract terms, GDP, supply chains, tariff schedules. But we need to remember who actually pays the price for this geopolitical theater. It's the auto worker in Windsor whose plant just cut production. It's the canola farmer in Saskatchewan who suddenly has nowhere to sell the harvest. These are the people whose livelihoods are being treated as bargaining chips. When Trump jokes about Canada being the 51st state, it plays well at his rallies, but it sends a chill through every Canadian boardroom and cabinet meeting. It forces a reaction. It forces a nationalism of our own, one that is defensive and fearful. Carney's trip is the manifestation of that fear. It is an attempt to build a firewall against American volatility. What we are witnessing is the unraveling of the North American idea. For decades, we believed that geography was destiny, that our proximity to the U.S. guaranteed our prosperity. That belief has been shattered. The border is no longer just a line on a map, it is a barrier. And so the Prime Minister flies to Beijing, not because he wants to, but because he has to. He is chasing the ghost of global trade in a world that is rapidly walling itself off. As we watch the footage of handshakes and motorcades over the coming days, we shouldn't be fooled by the diplomatic pageantry. We are watching a rescue mission for the Canadian economy, and the cost of that rescue might be higher than we think. The question we need to ask is not just whether Carney can get a deal, but what that deal says about who we are and where we are going. Are we trading one dependency for another? And in a world where our closest ally has turned against us, do we even have a choice? To understand the gamble, you have to understand the gambler. Mark Carney is not your typical retail politician, shaking hands at county fairs and speaking in empty platitudes about working hard for you. He is a creature of a different world entirely. To his supporters, he is the ultimate technocrat, the steady hand who knows how to keep the lights on when the storm hits. To his detractors, he is the embodiment of the detached cosmopolitan elite, a man who floats above the messy realities of nation states, equally at home in London, New York, or Davos. And frankly, both sides are right. Born in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, and raised in Edmonton, Carney's trajectory was almost engineered to lead to this moment. He didn't just go to university. He went to Harvard for his bachelor's and Oxford for his master's and doctorate. He spent 13 years at Goldman Sachs, moving between London, Tokyo, New York, and Toronto, learning the internal wiring of global finance. This is crucial context because it explains how he views the world. He doesn't see it through the lens of ideology or raw nationalism. He sees it through the lens of risk management. When he took over the Bank of Canada in 2008, just as the global financial system was melting down, he didn't panic. He adjusted the levers. He kept the Canadian banking system stable while the rest of the Western world teetered on the brink of collapse. Later, as the first non-British governor of the Bank of England, he had to navigate the sheer incoherence of Brexit. So when Carney looks at China, he doesn't see a communist monolith or a moral abyss. He sees a distressed asset. He sees a volatility index that needs to be hedged. He became Prime Minister in March 2025, winning a surprise election on a platform of economic resilience and, crucially, diversifying trade. He told us then that we needed to inoculate ourselves against external shocks. We didn't realize at the time that the shock he was preparing for wasn't just another pandemic or a market crash, but the hostility of our closest neighbor. Now, at 60 years old, he is applying that cold Goldman Sachs logic to the most heated diplomatic relationship on the planet. But this visit to Beijing isn't happening in a vacuum. It is happening against the backdrop of a relationship that has been effectively frozen for 7 years. To see how far we've fallen and how difficult the climb back up will be, you have to look at the history. There was a time when Canada and China were, if not friends, then at least enthusiastic partners. In 1970, under Pierre Trudeau, Canada was one of the first Western nations to recognize the People's Republic of China. For decades, that early recognition paid dividends. Trade boomed. By 2017, bilateral trade hit $100 billion annually. We sent them canola, lumber, and minerals. They sent us machinery and electronics. It was the neoliberal dream in action, economic integration, leading, we hoped, to political moderation. Then came 2018, and the dream turned into a nightmare. At the request of the United States, Canadian authorities arrested Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou in Vancouver. The charges were related to violating sanctions on Iran, but the geopolitical subtext was clear. The U.S. was tightening the screws on China's tech sector, and it expected Canada to fall in line. China's retaliation was swift and brutal. They detained 2 Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, and threw them into a black hole of the Chinese legal system. It was hostage diplomacy, plain and simple. For more than 1,000 days, the 2 Michaels were the face of a relationship in ruins. Beijing didn't stop there. They banned Canadian canola imports in 2019, claiming pest concerns, a transparent excuse for political payback. Trust evaporated, even after the Michaels were released in 2021, coinciding perfectly with the resolution of Meng Wanzhou's case. The chill remained. There were no high-level visits. Negotiations stalled. The air was thick with accusations of Chinese interference in Canadian elections and human rights abuses in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. A public inquiry in 2023 confirmed that foreign meddling was real, further hardening Canadian public opinion. By all conventional political logic, Carney should be nowhere near Beijing. The scars of the Meng Wanzhou affair are still fresh. The public is still wary. But conventional logic doesn't account for the desperation caused by a 35% American tariff. The ice began to crack, not because of a sudden warming of hearts, but because of cold, hard necessity. The turning point came in October 2025 at the APEC summit in South Korea. Carney and President Xi Jinping sat down for a 39-minute chat. In the world of high diplomacy, 39 minutes is an eternity. It was there that the invitation was extended. Xi expressed readiness to work with Canada to get ties back on the right track, specifically mentioning agriculture and energy. Carney seized the opening. He essentially looked at the map, looked at the protectionist wall Trump was building on the southern border, and decided that the risk of engaging China was lower than the risk of waiting for Washington to come to its senses. This is the system at work. It's a shift from the moralistic foreign policy of the previous decade to a gritty survivalist realism. The official story is that this is about opening doors. The reality is that Carney is trying to build an emergency exit. But here is where the story gets murky and where the official narrative starts to fray. We are being told that we can compartmentalize our relationship with China, that we can trade canola and energy while agreeing to disagree on human rights and foreign interference. That is the technocrats' delusion. The Chinese Communist Party does not compartmentalize. Everything is connected. Access to their market is a lever they use to extract political concessions. When Carney steps off that plane in Beijing, he isn't just a prime minister looking for buyers for Saskatchewan wheat. He is a supplicant. And in Beijing, supplicants are expected to pay a price. The question we need to ask as we watch this diplomatic dance is what exactly is on the table? We know about the canola, we know about the desire to diversify, but what is China asking for in return? They don't give away market access out of charity. They want something. And looking at the friction points between our nations, we can make some educated guesses. They want us to look the other way on their domestic crackdowns. They want access to our critical minerals. And perhaps most controversially, they want us to drop our defenses against their most powerful new export, electric vehicles. This brings us to the most explosive potential trade-off of the entire trip. Since October 2024, Canada has imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, marching in lockstep with the United States and the European Union. It was a move designed to protect our domestic auto industry and, crucially, to show Washington that we were on their team in the great tech war of the 21st century. But now, with Washington punishing our auto sector anyway, that loyalty looks like a bad investment. There are rumors, persistent, quiet rumors, that Carney might be willing to ease those EV tariffs. If he does, he opens the floodgates to cheaper Chinese cars, which would be a boon for consumers struggling with the cost of living. But it would be viewed in the White House as a betrayal. It would be seen as Canada breaking the North American defensive line. This is the system behind the headlines. It is a complex web of leverage where tariffs on soybeans in one part of the world affect the price of electric cars in another. It involves immense corporate interests like Brookfield Asset Management, the firm Carney chaired after leaving the Bank of England, which has significant dealings in China. When you have a prime minister who has spent his life in the boardrooms that manage these global flows, you get a policy that prioritizes the flow of capital above almost everything else. We are watching a real-time experiment in whether a middle power can play both sides against the middle. Carney is betting that he is smart enough to use China to offset the U.S. without getting crushed by either. It is the kind of arrogant, brilliant high-wire act that only a man with his resume would attempt. But resume or not, he is playing with fire. And as we will see, the heat from this trip is already being felt, not just in the corridors of power, but in the fields and factories across this country. The decision to go to Beijing isn't just a strategic abstraction. It triggers a chain reaction that touches the lives of farmers, factory workers, and families who are watching their economic security dissolve. To understand the human cost of this geopolitical chess game, we need to leave the summit rooms and look at the ground level, where the trade war is actually fought. Let's drop the abstractions and look at what this trade war actually looks like on the ground, because it isn't just numbers on a ledger. It's Sarah Nguyen, an auto engineer in Ontario who spent 12 years building a life around a job she thought was permanent. She works at a plant that assembles truck parts specifically for export to the United States. When the tariffs hit, first the 25% in February, then the hike to 35% in August, the impact wasn't theoretical. It was immediate. Her plant cut shifts from 5 days a week to 3. She told reporters, "We planned our lives around stable jobs." But now she's watching her health benefits hang in the balance and worrying about her mortgage. This is the collateral damage of America First. It's not just a policy choice. It's a direct assault on the stability of Canadian families. And it's not just the factory floor. Go to the prairies and you'll find Tom Henderson, a third-generation farmer in Saskatchewan. He farms 2,000 acres, and until recently, 70% of his harvest went to China. When Beijing retaliated against Canadian policies with tariffs on canola seed, hitting a staggering 75.8%, the bottom fell out of his world. Prices tanked. He lost thousands of dollars in real-time valuation, forced to dump harvest or sell at a loss. "We're paying for decisions made far away," he said. And he's right. He is paying the price for a diplomatic dispute he didn't start, caught between a hostile Washington and a vengeful Beijing. This is the chaotic reality Carney is trying to fix. His strategy is being called diversification, but that's a polite word for a frantic scramble. He has set a goal to double non-U.S. exports in a decade. It's a moonshot. To get there, he isn't just looking at China. He's looking at Europe, pushing to deepen the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, to sell the energy and uranium that a post-Russia Europe desperately needs. He's courting capital from the Qatar Investment Authority to fund infrastructure. He's using the World Economic Forum in Davos, scheduled right after his China trip, to pitch global CEOs on Canada as a sanctuary of stability. As Carney put it recently, "When one door closes, we need others open." That isn't rhetoric. It is a survival manual for a country that just realized it's trapped in a burning building. But there is a darker complication here that we cannot ignore. In pivoting to China to save our economy, we risk undermining our own security alliances. We are a founding member of NATO. We have contributed over $23 billion to Ukraine since 2022 to fight off Russian aggression. Yet here we are, deepening ties with the very country, China, that U.S. intelligence says is Russia's decisive enabler, providing the dual-use goods that keep Putin's war machine running. It is a profound strategic contradiction. Carney is effectively asking us to do business with the banker of our enemy. If Canada lowers tariffs on Chinese EVs to get our canola back into Beijing, we aren't just angering Trump, we are potentially cracking the Western sanctions wall. Yeah, and this is the trap of the modern world. There are no clean hands. Carney knows that if he succeeds in pivoting Canada away from U.S. dependence, it sends a signal to other middle powers like Japan or Mexico that American dominance is no longer absolute. It erodes U.S. soft power. But if he fails, Canada remains vulnerable to the whims of a White House that views us as the 51st state. So, as the Prime Minister walks the red carpet in Beijing, remember that this is a turning point. We are watching the end of the easy era of Canadian history, where we could take our prosperity and our security for granted. We are entering a new, sharper reality where every trade deal is a political battlefield. The question isn't just whether Carney can sell more wheat or attract more investment. The question is whether Canada can forge a path that is truly its own, or if we are destined to simply trade one master for another. The era of the post-national state is over. The era of hard choices has just begun.